They say some stories in the West will follow you long after the fire dies. Like the day I first saw her by the old cottonwood tree, clutching something that would change my life forever. Dry Creek, Wyoming. Autumn, 1889. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke and the sharp bite of the coming winter, slipping down from the snow line and curling through the valley like a warning. Silas McGraw rode slowly along the Blackhorn Trail, his old bay mare Whisper, placing each hoof as if she could feel the weight of his thoughts. In the wagon behind them, a sack of cornmeal thudded softly against strips of smoked beef, and a bottle of Snakebite Special whiskey caught the light like amber fire. The land was painted in two halves, rolling hills on his right, gilded in the dying sun, and endless plains on his left, where the horizon dissolved into a haze of dust and sky. Even the air felt stretched thin, every sound magnified, the creak of worn leather, the lazy rattle of the bridle rings, the hollow knock of wagon wheels over hardened ground. And then he saw her. Under the twisted arms of an ancient cottonwood, a girl sat with her knees pulled close, her back pressed against the ridged bark. She was small enough to be lost in the tree's shadow, yet still, she held herself as if she were bracing against more than the cold. Ash blonde hair spilled in tangled strands across her face, catching in the breeze like dry prairie grass. Her arms cradled a heavy bundle wrapped in a worn wool blanket, too carefully, too tightly, for it to be anything but precious. She didn't look up until Whisper's hooves cracked a fallen branch. When she did, her eyes met his, not wide with fear, nor soft with trust, but steady, unflinching, and far too old for her years. They were the kind of eyes you found in people who had walked farther than their bodies should have allowed, and seen things that never left them. Silas felt it before he could name it. That subtle shift inside, like a door opening on a room he hadn't entered in years. Loneliness, sharp and familiar. Answering loneliness. Somewhere high above, a hawk circled in slow, deliberate arcs. The wind died for a moment, and in that stillness, he knew the trail home would not be the same after today. Silas drew back gently on the reins, and Whisper came to a halt with a soft grunt, the leather creaking under his weight. The mare's ears twitched forward, alert, but she stayed steady. She trusted him enough to follow his stillness. He let the wagon settle behind them, the rattle of its contents dying away, until the only sounds were the restless flutter of leaves overhead and Hank's soft panting beside the wheel. He didn't ride closer just yet. Out here, in the open stretch of Wyoming land, trust was like water in a drought. Hard to come by, easy to spill. So he stayed in the saddle a moment longer, eyes fixed on the figure beneath the cottonwood. The girl sat low, almost folded in on herself, her knees drawn up, chin tipped slightly forward, as though conserving every bit of warmth the tree's shadow could offer. The bundle in her arms was heavy-looking, awkward for someone her size to hold, yet she kept it cradled with the care of something irreplaceable. The blanket's faded wool was patched and frayed, with one corner hanging loose to reveal a glimpse of worn brown cloth beneath. Her head turned just enough for him to see the glint of eyes, storm gray with the guarded stillness of a stray animal that had learned both sides of kindness. Silas cleared his throat. "Afternoon, miss," he called, the words unhurried, shaped to fit the quiet around them. His tone was warm but measured, the same he'd use coaxing a skittish calf away from barbed wire. "Name's Silas McGraw. My ranch is about 8 miles that way." He gestured loosely toward the valley. The girl didn't answer. The wind caught at her hair, pale as dried prairie grass, pushing loose strands across her cheek. She blinked once, but otherwise didn't move. "You out here by yourself?" He tried again, softer this time. Silence. Not the stubborn kind, but the kind that says words might cost too much. That's when Hank, the old hound, padded a step toward her, head low. He sniffed once, twice, then stopped as if he'd run into an invisible fence. The fur along his spine lifted, and a low growl rumbled out, deep and unbroken. His tail curled down, and his paws shifted back a fraction. Silas's gaze dropped to the bundle. Something in the dog's reaction clawed at his mind. He'd seen animals act like that before, on battlefields, near certain wagons in the snow, in the days after the fighting when the ground itself seemed to remember. Slowly, he swung down from the saddle, the dust crunching under his boots. He kept his hands visible, palms open. "Easy now," he said, letting each word carry the weight of calm. "Ain't here to trouble you." The girl's grip tightened on the bundle. The blanket shifted slightly, but whatever was inside didn't move. Not even a stir. A shadow fell across the road, and Silas turned his head. From between the junipers, a tall man emerged, buckskin fringes swaying with each step, long black hair streaked with silver, braided and bound with dyed red leather. Slung across his shoulder was a bow wrapped in otter fur, the kind that spoke of tradition, not just utility. Jonas Red Elk. Silas hadn't laid eyes on him in near half a year, but there was no mistaking the Shoshone hunter's deliberate stride, or the way his presence seemed to steady the space around him. Jonas's gaze moved from Silas to the girl, then to the bundle. He stood silent for a breath, listening in that way only someone raised in the high country could, like the air itself might tell him the truth. He spoke then in Shoshone, his voice low and even, the words curling through the cool air like wood smoke. Silas tilted his head. "What's that mean?" Jonas looked at him, eyes narrowing just enough to cut through the sunlight. "It means," he said quietly, "the wind carries a scent it shouldn't." The girl flinched, so slight most wouldn't have noticed. But Silas did. And in that moment, something inside him shifted from curiosity to certainty. Whatever was in that bundle, it wasn't just heavy with wool. The wind picked up again, tugging at the trees, rattling the dry leaves. Silas took another step forward, the boards of the wagon creaking behind him. Hank's growl following like a warning neither man nor child could ignore. The valley held its breath. Leaves trembled but did not fall. A hawk stalled in the sky, wings locked, as if it too were listening to the quiet between three lives on the trail. Silas took one more step. Dust lifted around his boot and drifted away. The girl did not flinch this time. Only the bundle shifted, the wool tightening across its hidden shape. Hank's growl guttered lower, then steadied again, a warning spun from old instincts and older memories. Jonas stood like a post driven into river gravel. He said nothing more, but the line of his shoulders told Silas the hunter had already measured the distance between what could still be mended and what had long since slipped past mending. Far off, so far it could have been a trick of wind, came a sound like a bucket banging a gate. Then another, closer. Metal on wood. Leather slapping. Harness rings chattering into panic. Hank's head snapped east. Whisper's ears cut toward the ridge. The hawk folded and vanished. Silas didn't think. He moved. He was in the saddle before the thought had a name. Reins tight, knees turning whisper toward the sound. Dust licked up under her hooves as they angled to the bend where the road dropped through a cut of shale and sage. Jonas was already moving on foot, a long glide that ate ground without hurry. The girl rose as if pulled by a string, bundle crushed close to her chest, eyes fixed on where the trail knifed between the low hills. The first thing to appear was a plume of powdered earth. Then a wheel, at the wrong angle. Then the whole mad wreck of a freight wagon, pitching sidewise across the cut. Two mules wild with terror and a driver sawing the lines like he meant to cut the air itself. The near wheel, split along a weather check, bit a rock and leapt. The bed slammed and the load skidded, a crate shattering its lath and vomiting canvas bundles and iron stoves and a scatter of glass that caught the light and threw it like knives. The wagon was coming straight for the cottonwood. Silas shouted once, not a word, a sound, and Whisper lunged. He cut across the road and up the wash, angling to take the team at an oblique line, to rake their momentum, shift their arc. The mule's eyes were white with the kind of stupid terror that eats up good animals when wood splits and men lose their hands. He reached for the bit of the near mule as it plowed past. Leather slapped his palm, then the animal veered, dragging the pole and the near side of the wagon into a slide that chewed the road into gouges. The wagon overturned in a slow, awful roll. The driver jumped too late and went tumbling, hit the shale, slid, and lay still. The load came down in a thundering grief of wood and tin and smoke-fine dust. A last crate burst, and something inside thudded with a sound that was not iron and not wood. A placard, knocked free, spun and skittered into the sage until it banged to rest against a stone. Red letters glared from rough pine. Quarantine. County order. Everything went quiet again, except for the soft, broken wheeze of a mule and the thin ticking of cooling iron. Silas was off his horse and at the driver's side in 3 strides. Blood matted the man's hair, but the skull felt whole under Silas's rough, careful fingers. A wrist jerked, and the man sucked in air like someone had let him remember how. His eyes opened to slits, scraped raw by dust. He tried to speak. A string of stuck-together syllables fell out and died. Jonas knelt by the wreck. He didn't touch the placard. He didn't need to. He stood again and turned his face to the breeze, as if listening to what it carried from the splintered belly of the wagon. Silas eased the driver onto his side. The man's chest hitched and steadied. Then Silas looked up. The girl had not moved. She stood where the cottonwood shadow cut across the road, bundle clamped to her ribs, eyes on the red letters that had been meant to face outward along some official route, not roll wild into the sage. Her breath was shallow enough to be silence. Silas felt the prickle rise under his shirt. He had seen signs like that before, nailed to doors, hung on posts, painted onto the end boards of wagons that clattered through in the night and did not stop. Those signs had meanings you didn't look away from. Jonas's voice reached him on the wind. "There are blankets in that load," he said, still not touching anything. "And a box marked for Clearwater Depot. Government script on the paper. Could be supplies for the sick or supplies from the sick. Either way, the air here isn't clean." Silas wiped his palms on his trousers out of reflex. He found his hat brim and tugged it down, a useless gesture that felt like a barrier. Then he looked at the girl again. Her eyes weren't on the wagon now. They'd found the dog and then Whisper, and then, as if bracing for a blow, they came to rest on his face. There was something there, apology maybe, or an odd kind of relief, that made no sense at all. Hank whined. It was a small sound for a big dog, the voice a beast makes when he knows something is wrong, but cannot set his teeth to it. Silas crossed the road. He didn't reach for the bundle. He reached for the space between them, and he spoke the closest thing to a prayer he still knew, which was the language of the work he could be sure of. "All right," he said, quiet as a man speaking into a church. "All right, little miss. We're not standing in this wind another minute." He turned his head toward Jonas. "Help me set the wagon to rights, or strip what we can and burn the rest." Jonas hesitated, not with fear, but with the quick arithmetic of risk every hunter learns before he learns to draw a bow. He nodded once. "We take the living and what won't carry sickness. The rest we give back to fire." They moved like men in a drill. Silas checked the mules, speaking into their panic until it eased enough for him to cut the traces. Jonas rolled the driver onto a tarp pulled from a split crate and dragged him to the lee of the cottonwood, where what breeze there was thinned out. They set a watchfire, small and deliberate, and fed it clean wood until the flames steadied and the smoke ran pale. That was when the second blow fell, the unlooked-for one that would follow all of them long after the fire died. Hoofbeats, 4 sets, quick and purposeful. The rhythm of men who ride, not for the joy of it, but for the catching of something. Silas did not look away from the girl, but his hand found the calm of Whisper's neck without asking. They came around the bend like a warning drawn in dust. 2 men in town coats dark with trail grime, one in a deputy's star that had seen more spit than polish, and a woman riding a small, quick roan like she meant to outrun herself. Silas knew her. Clara Mae Thompson of Dry Creek. She ran the bar and boarding room behind it, kept her hair pinned the way respectable ladies did, and could throw a drunk like a sack of oats if the night asked for it. Her eyes said she'd ridden hard without telling anybody why. The deputy's horse jittered at the smell of the wreck. The man hauled him to a stand anyway, jaw set for quarreling. The other coat peered at the quarantine placard and lost a shade of his color. Clara Mae did not look at the wreck. She looked at the girl. Something opened on her face that was not tears and not relief. It was worse because it was both at once. She slid out of the saddle and hit the ground faster than the men could swear at her to wait. The roan tossed its head, reins falling. Clara Mae took 1 step toward the girl, then another, then stopped with her hands curled and empty. "I saw you," she said, the plain truth laid bare to the wind. Her voice was raw around the edges, cut by speed and something older. "2 nights ago, behind the stockyard fence, you asked for water. She swallowed. The words tumbled and went ragged. "I told myself it was late, and men were watching, and I had to mind my own. I went back inside and scrubbed a glass until the sun came." No one moved. Even the deputy, ready as a loaded spring, found that he had nothing smart to put over top of that. Silas could taste the grit of his own silence. He knew the shape of that kind of confession. He had carried such shapes, some lighter than they had any right to be, and some that never sat anywhere but center. The deputy found his voice like a man finding a lost coin. "Town's under orders," he said, pitched louder than the air required. He gestured at the placard with his chin like he didn't want to give it his hands. "County wants bodies and blankets marked and burned. Wants vagrants gathered for the quarantine barn unless they can show a name and a property line. There's a doctor riding out from Clearwater with the army man." Jonas did not blink. "You smell law," he said quietly, "the way I smell weather." The deputy bristled, automatically at the man's calm. "I smell trouble," he snapped, "and I see it." Clara Mae looked at the bundle, then at Silas again. Whatever she saw in him, steadiness or bone-tired patience, or the little bit of truth a man cannot hide even if he wants to, made her drop her eyes in a gratitude she did not speak. "Let me fetch water," she said, but her feet did not move. The roan tossed its head and snorted, as if to call her a liar. Silas raised a hand slowly, palm out. He spoke without raising his voice. "No one is touching this child unless I say so." He let the stillness after the words do the hard work. "We've got a man down and a wreck that needs tending. We'll burn what we must. Then I'll take the girl out of this wind." The deputy swung his gaze to the bundle and back like his eyes were hot. His mouth opened to put the badge between himself and the problem. Jonas moved his head a fraction, barely enough to count, and in that small tilt lay the promise of a fight whose winner would limp home alone. Clara Mae broke the stalemate by moving where no one thought to stop her. She went not to the girl, but to the mules, set her hands to their trembling necks, and breathed with them until their knees bent and their weight went into the ground. It was a small, useful mercy, and it cooled the air around everything else by a degree. The wreck gave them its secrets in pieces. A ledger, a coil of hemp, a crate of tools, A bundle of shirts wrapped in brown paper, stamped with watermarks from the county storehouse. Jonas slit one with his knife and found wool too fine for prisoners and too coarse for parlor men. Cloth built for cold or for dying in it. Under the last layer lay a small wooden box with a bright, clean lock that looked like money had bought it recently. It had not split in the wreck. It had only lost its straps and been thrown into the sage. Jonas brought it to the wagon's shaded side and set it down without ceremony. Clara May crouched and traced the lock with her thumb. She did not read the embossed letters aloud. Silas's eyes were on the girl even then. She had not sat. She had not dropped the bundle. The wind chewed at the edges of her dress and could not find more to steal. "Little miss," he said, and the words were just the sound of a man making room. "I've got coffee in the bedroll. Not good coffee, mind you, but hot." Her eyes moved, slow. The smallest crease formed at her mouth, not a smile, memory trying to stand up. "What's your name?" he asked. It was not a demand. Names given are different than names taken. Silence. Then a whisper shaped like paper against paper. "Mara Lee." He nodded as if she had told him the one thing he needed to cross a river safely. He did not ask for the name of what she held. The wind had told him enough to walk on. The deputy shifted his weight, impatience popping his boot leather. "We're not making a parlor out here," he snapped. "Orders." "Say, orders ride with men," Silas said without heat. "And men decide how they ride." Jonas half smiled, not that anyone but the wind noticed it. "The fire's ready," he said. "We start with what the county sent, and then with what the county should have sent and didn't. A prayer." They burned the blankets first, the ones marked with the depot stamp. The smoke rising in a dark column, then thinning as the sage wind worried it to tatters. They burned the broken crate that had carried the sign and the shattered parts of stove and frame that would catch soot and hold it like grief. Jonah spoke in Shoshone, not words for the dead yet, but for the living who carry them. Clara May bowed her head, lips moving without sound. The deputy stood apart, caught between his orders and the old math of land and neighbor that no badge carries inside it. He looked at the girl more than once. He looked away each time like looking hurt. When the last board fell to ember, Jonas took the small box with the new lock and set it beside the edge of the coals. The heat licked the finish and drew sap scent out of wood that had never known a tree. He did not break it. He waited. The lock cracked with a sound like knucklebone. He opened it and let the lid talk softly back to its hinges. Inside lay what none of them expected, and yet all of them recognized in some corner they did not dust. A child's cradle charm carved from deer bone, a twist of hair ribbon, a folded paper with 2 names on it written in a hand that had learned letters late, and, wrapped in cloth, a thin polished coin on a string, worn by Thumb and Kiss. Jonas did not touch the coin. He unfolded the paper and read the names to himself. He handed it to Silas as if handing back a truth that had been waiting for its owner. The names were not Mara Lee and not Silas's to speak. Beneath them was a line in the same hand, crooked with hurry. "Find a place the wind sings." Promise kept his peace. The girl watched the paper travel like watching a bird cross a river. She did not cry. Some people don't. Some can't anymore. Clara May's breath shuddered in and smoothed itself out. She picked up the charm and held it as a woman holds a thing that can't hurt her and can still break her. "I should have brought you water," she said to nobody and everybody. Silas closed the box. He set it in the wagon, away from the fire, away from the deputy, away from everything but what came next. He stood and let the choice join him in his bones. He looked at Jonas. He looked at the girl. He looked once, only once, at the road to Dry Creek, where a doctor and an army man, would come riding with clean hands and hard mouths and a stack of papers that could not smell the wind. "All right," he said. The word had weight. It landed and sank and held. "We take the living out of here." He lifted his palm again to the deputy, not a stop now, but a plain, open offer. "You can ride with us or behind us. You can write your report in the shade of my porch. But you won't lay a hand on this child today. Not while I'm standing." Something in the deputy loosened. Fear or pride, or the knotted place where both pretend they're law. He didn't nod. He didn't speak. He moved his horse aside, which was enough. Clara May walked to the girl without coming too close. She held out a tin cup. Not water. The kettle had given her what it could. Coffee, thin and honest. The girl looked at it like it might bite. Then she remembered the crease at her mouth and let it happen again, smaller but real. Mara Lee shifted the bundle just enough to free one hand. She took the cup. She brought it near her face and breathed the steam like a small, quiet mercy. The wind shifted and carried the scent of coffee and ash and sage across the road in a ribbon, knotting itself into a memory none of them would ever quite undo. Silas moved to whisper and set his hand on the saddle horn. Over his shoulder, the cottonwood leaves flickered, green backs, silver fronts, speaking their language of sunlight and warning. "Come on then," he said, not to the men and not to the law, but to the day itself. "Trail's waiting." He turned whisper toward Blackhorn Valley. Jonas lifted the driver into the wagon with a strength that did not ask for help, and then climbed in himself to hold the man steady. Clara May swung onto her roan and took the flank like she'd ridden with them all her life. The deputy dropped in behind, the star at his breast turned dull by dust. Mara Lee came last, her steps small and exact, as if measuring the earth before she gave it her weight. The bundle rested against her heart. The wind, finally, remembered how to move, and ran down the valley ahead of them, carrying smoke and coffee, and the faintest, most surprising thing of all, the smell of rain. The valley stretched quiet under a sinking sun, gold light bleeding across sagebrush. Silas led the way, Whisper's hooves steady on the rutted trail. Behind him, the wagon creaked, wheels grinding in rhythm with the mare's stride. Mara Lee sat rigid beside Jonas, her bundle clutched tight, like it was part of her bones. The group rode in a tense line, Silas ahead, Jonas at the wagon, Clara May on the flank, her gaze sharp but distant. The deputy trailed behind, his badge glinting like a warning in the fading light. No one spoke. The air carried questions too heavy for words, like dust caught in a stirrup. It should have been straightforward. Get to the ranch, feed everyone, patch up the driver. But out here, nothing stayed simple. 2 miles from Silas's fence, dust kicked up behind them, fast, deliberate. A rider in a green-gray coat tore through the haze. Vance Ketter, county inspector, reined his horse hard beside the wagon, the animal snorting from the run. "County orders," Vance barked, skipping pleasantries. "Anyone touching quarantined freight or its handlers goes to the isolation barn. 30 days. Silas's jaw clenched. "We ain't cattle to be penned, Vance." "Not your call," Vance shot back. His eyes flicked to Mara Lee, then her bundle. "That includes strays." Jonas's hands froze on the reins, his stare pinning Vance. "We pulled a man from a wreck. Didn't ask your paper's permission to save him." Vance didn't blink. "Hand her over, McGraw. Keep your ranch clean. Keep your neighbors from talking." The words landed like a stone in still water. Clara May leaned forward in her saddle. If the county cared about clean, they wouldn't let kids sleep behind stockyards. "You pour drinks, Clara," Vance snapped. "Leave law to those who wear it." Silas glanced at Mara Lee. She didn't speak, But her grip on the bundle screamed understanding. Resignation, not fear, etched in her young face. She'd been judged and discarded before. He turned to Vance, voice low, cutting through the wind. "If you think I'm locking her in a barn with the sick, you're dumber than the dust you rode in on." "That barn's county policy," Vance said, hand twitching toward a sealed paper in his coat. "This valley's my policy," Silas replied, calm but unyielding. "Test it if you want." Jonas shifted slightly, his ease masking the speed of a man who could knock an arrow before Vance could draw breath. The inspector's hand stilled. The moment hung, brittle, the truth plain. Laws were made for those they'd never touch. Vance yanked his reins, his horse wheeling. He rode off without another word, dust trailing like a bitter aftertaste. Silence held until the ranch fence loomed in sight. Clara May broke it, muttering, "Law's quick to take, slow to help." Mara Lee's eyes flicked to her, quick as a spark. Not trust, but a flicker of defiance, as if the world's judgment wasn't final. The yard took them in like a pair of cupped hands. Split rail fence, windmill ticking, porch boards sun-bleached to the color of old bone. Silas swung down first and felt the ache in his knees argue with the urgency in his chest. The wagon groaned to a stop by the cistern. Chickens paused, heads cocked, then went back to scratching as if the world were a simple thing. Work came before thinking. It had to. Jonas lifted the injured driver as if the man were a sack of seed, not a tangle of ribs and dust and bad luck. They carried him to the bunkhouse, the one with the window that caught afternoon light. Clara May fetched clean water without asking where the bucket lived. The deputy, still riding the uneasy line between order and shame, tethered the horses, then hovered at the porch like a man afraid to enter a church he didn't believe in. Mara Lee stopped at the porch step. She didn't cross the threshold. The bundle rested against her heart as if her bones had been built around it. Inside, the house smelled of lye soap, old coffee, and a memory of cinnamon from a winter long gone. Silas set a kettle to boil and shoved more wood into the stove than it needed. The roar steadied his hands. He laid out what he had: cornmeal, beans, a strip of bacon, the last onion from a braid that once touched the floor and now barely brushed the shelf. Food is proof, he thought. A table says what a man believes. He scrubbed a pot with sand, boiled the spoons, set a second kettle to boil again just because the first didn't feel like enough. Then he stopped himself and did the thing he had been avoiding. He went to the washstand by the door and rinsed, hands, wrists, forearms, until his skin flushed. Jonas followed suit without being asked. Clara May rolled up her sleeves and did the same, jaw tight. The deputy stared at the basin as though it might convict him, then plunged his hands in with the desperation of a man who wants the water to agree with his choices. Silas laid out 3 cups. He looked at the 4th, then at the girl. "You can sit by the open window," he said, voice even. "Not because I'm afraid of you, because the wind's a good housekeeper when we let it." She nodded once. Relief and hurt crossed her face like 2 birds passing each other in opposite skies. She sat on the threshold, 1 foot on the porch, 1 inside, the bundle in her lap, eyes on the kettle like watching a safe horizon. Clara May moved like she belonged there and knew she didn't. She broke the bacon into the bean pot with a sure hand, then set a pan for cornbread, as if her bar stove had taught her this very kitchen's temper. When she passed behind Mara Lee, she hesitated the smallest fraction, the way a person does when they want to touch and aren't sure they're allowed. She didn't touch. Her mercy was to keep moving. Jonas reappeared from the bunkhouse. "Driver's breathing easy," he said. "Head will drum for days. Chest's clear. He knows his name. He doesn't know why the county paints fear on wood and sends it rolling." Silas nodded, not trusting his mouth to hold all he wanted to say about fear and wood, and what men do when paper tells them to. He ladled coffee into tin cups. It steamed like a promise you have to lean close to believe. The deputy stepped into the room, hat in his hands. The star on his vest looked heavy enough to drag him forward. "I'm obliged to tell you," he said, eyes not quite meeting anyone's, "that harboring contact from quarantined goods breaks county order. A report goes in, names with it." Silas set a cup on the table with careful quiet. "A report can go wherever a piece of paper can go," he said. "This house is where people go." "That house," the deputy answered, chin toward the bunkhouse, "has a man pulled from under a marked wagon. And this porch—" His gaze fell to the girl and stopped there, ashamed of itself. "Has what it has." Clara May's voice sharpened, but she kept it low. "If the county wants to pin guilt, it can start with me." "No," Silas said, not loud, not soft, true. "If it starts anywhere, it starts with me. This is my fence, my gate, my choice." Silence swelled. The kettle rattled and spat. Outside, the wind leaned against the siding and moved on. He felt the old war settle across his shoulders like a coat he'd hung up and never mended. In another season, another uniform, he'd been the man who chose when to stay, when to carry, when to leave a friend in the snow because the living needed his legs. He had carried that day as carefully as a name pinned under his ribs. He was not going to repeat it in his own kitchen with a child holding a bundle no wind could pry from her. But duty had a twin. It asked questions the heart didn't like. Could he bring sickness to the valley? Could he keep his men, what men he still counted as such, fed, paid, alive? Could he face neighbors who would come asking in that tight, polite voice people use when they are about to take something from you in the name of everyone? Jonas leaned a shoulder to the doorframe, the posture of a man who has stood at more thresholds than rooms. "Law is a tool," he said. "Knife, rope, fire, depends who holds it." The deputy flinched like the words had come close enough to shave him. He set his hat on the table, then the star on top of it, a quiet surrender or a loan he meant to call back later. "My pa taught me the law was there to keep things fair," he said, voice rough. "But he also said fairness is a road, not a fence. I don't know what this is. I just know I don't want to be the man who nails boards over a child." Mara Lee looked up at him for the first time, not with gratitude, with a study so hard it might polish stone. She blinked once and returned her attention to the cup in her hands. The bundle never shifted. The cornbread went into the stove. The room filled with the smell that had the power to undo bad years. Clara May wiped her hands on her skirt, then spoke to the floor because speaking to people might make the words wobble. "2 nights ago," she said, "I made a choice to keep my windows clean and my room quiet. I closed a door on a child. If the county looks for a body to throw in its barn, it can have mine first." Silas felt the past move again, but in a different way. His wife's laugh in these very walls, the small things she had collected because beauty is how you trick a hard world into making room for gentleness. Catherine would have set a plate and not asked questions louder than hunger. He found himself placing a 4th tin plate on the table before his mind decided to. The deputy cleared his throat. "There's talk," he said, eyes on the star like it might answer him. "Quarantine Barn took 2 Shoshone kids last week for observation. 1 came out. 1 didn't." Jonas's stillness turned to stone. The room cooled a degree, though the stove snapped loud as twigs breaking underfoot. "Observation," he said, tasting the word as if it were a coin he meant to bite through. Silas's thoughts, already a hard river, hit a rapid. He could feel the track of it in his chest. He saw, as if from outside himself, the 3 roads that ran from this table. Obey, betray, or build a 3rd road between them with his own hands. He thought of the hill behind the house, where the wind sang in spring, and the roses Catherine had planted had run wild and taken the fence like it was something worth softening. "Listen," he said, finally trusting his voice to carry what the house already knew. He faced the deputy but spoke to everyone. "We'll do this plain. We keep the driver apart. We boil what needs boiling. We burn what won't clean. There's a spare room with a window and a door that sticks when it rains. The child sits there, and the wind takes what it should. No one touches what she holds until she says they can. Not the county, not me." Mara Lee didn't move, but the room felt her answer anyway. A small easing like a muscle unclenching after carrying a load too long. "After that," Silas continued, "I'll ride to Dry Creek. I'll put my name at the top of whatever paper a man with a clean sleeve wants me to read. If there's a cost, it takes me first." The deputy looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "You do that, the law will be obliged to do what it does," Silas finished. "And I'll be obliged to do what I do." Jonas tilted his head. "Then we are agreed. We make 2 fires, one for fear, one for food. We feed the right one." Clara May exhaled, a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. She pulled the cornbread, golden and honest, and set it on the table. The knife clicked against the tin as she cut. Steam rose. The smell crawled under the door and onto the porch until even the wind smelled like a home. Silas took a slice to the threshold and held it out. "It's too hot," he said. "That's how you know it's worth waiting for." Mara Lee didn't reach. She looked at the bread like memory, and hunger had to agree first. Then she shifted the bundle, only enough to free a hand, and touched the crust with the careful finger of someone who has lived long with things that break if you're not gentle. She didn't eat. She held it and breathed in. The deputy picked up his star, weighed it, then set it down again. "I'll write what I saw," he said finally. "I saw a wreck. I saw a man saved. I saw a fire that took wood and gave warmth back. I saw no child. Or if I did, I saw her on the wind." Jonas's mouth bent into something close to approval. "Wind is hard to subpoena," he murmured. A bell clanged, thin with distance from the road to town, one of those handbells a doctor carries because sound travels faster than a man can run. Silas felt the house breathe in. Outside, dust lifted on the horizon, and the wind twisted to bring the scent of horse and iron and clean linen. The army man would come with paper. The doctor would come with questions that felt like orders. Silas looked at the room that had been an echo chamber for grief and was now a council of the stubborn living. The hunter leaning easy but ready. The barwoman with flour on her knuckles like prayer. The deputy measuring a badge against a child's face and finding the metal wanting. The girl at the threshold, half in, half out, whole in a way the county didn't have a form for. He set his hand on the table to steady the choice that had already been made. "Eat," he said to everyone and to himself. "Then we answer the bell." The clang came again, closer now, heavy with the kind of purpose that doesn't slow for fences. Dust boiled along the road in the last orange of daylight. Silas could see the silhouettes, one rider upright and stiff, another hunched forward with a bag strapped across his chest. Jonas shifted his weight from one boot to the other, like a man deciding which arrow to keep in hand. Clara May brushed crumbs from her skirt, her face unreadable. The deputy stepped onto the porch, Star still sitting on the kitchen table behind him, as though leaving it there might change what was about to happen. Mara Lee stayed in her place at the threshold, bundle anchored to her ribs. She didn't lean to see the riders. She listened, the way some folks listen to storms, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. The first rider slowed at the gate, reining in hard enough for the bit to ring. He wore the clean khaki of an army quartermaster, brass bright, creases sharp as saw teeth. The second dismounted stiffly, the doctor's bag swinging low. "Evening," Silas said, voice level as a plumb line. The doctor nodded without smile or frown. "We've had word of a wreck carrying quarantined freight. County sent us to inspect." Silas didn't move aside. Wreck's been seen to. Freight burned. Man from under the wagons breathing steady in my bunkhouse. The army man's gaze slid past him toward the porch, toward the girl. And the child? Jonas stepped forward half a pace, a shadow between the question and the answer. The wind carried no sickness here, he said. Clara May's voice was quiet, but it carried. And if the wind didn't, neither did we. The army man's jaw tightened. The doctor studied Mara Lee with a professional's blankness that still felt like measuring. Policy says, he began. Silas cut in. Policy doesn't eat at my table. People do. She's staying. The army man's eyes went hard. Then the report will say you refused county procedure. Silas didn't blink. Write it. Make it clear enough they can read it 100 miles from here. The riders exchanged a glance, paper and authority meeting the unmoving weight of a man's own ground. The doctor closed his bag without opening it. Keep the wind moving through the house, he said, mounting again. And burn what you can't boil. They left in a churn of hooves, the bell silenced, dust trailing behind like a bad thought trying to keep up. When the road was empty, the yard felt bigger, quieter. Jonas looked to the hills, Clara May to the kitchen, the deputy to his badge left sitting where it was. Silas finally turned to the girl. Looks like we've got work tomorrow, he said. Mara Lee gave the smallest nod, and for the first time her fingers eased on the bundle. Just a fraction, but enough for the others to notice. Question to the audience. If you were in Silas's boots, would you have followed County Orders 1? Or stood your ground like he did, 2? Comment your choice below. Night came early in the valley, as it always did when the wind turned cool and the ridge swallowed the last of the sun. Silas had walked the yard twice, making sure the gate was latched and the lamps along the porch were turned low. The air smelled of mesquite smoke and something heavier. Beans and chili powder. The slow, warm perfume of a pot of Texas chili con carne simmering on the back of the stove. Inside, the house felt close, not with heat, but with the press of unasked questions. Clara May sat at the kitchen table, turning a spoon in her hands. Jonas leaned against the counter, eyes on the window as though expecting the dark to answer him back. The deputy was gone, rode off at dusk, saying nothing about when he'd be back or which side of the fence he'd land on. Mara Lee was upstairs, in the small room Silas had aired out before dinner, her bundle still with her. Silas had told her she could keep the door open if she wanted. She'd closed it, but gently, like a line drawn in the dust that still allowed you to see the other side. The chili was nearly done when a low thud came from below. Soft enough that a man could pretend he hadn't heard it, loud enough that none of them did. Jonas straightened first. Cellar, he said, a statement, not a question. Silas wiped his hands on a rag. Only thing down there's winter stores. Cabbages, potatoes, and a few jars of Catherine's preserves I never could bring myself to open. Another sound, sharper this time. Metal on wood. Clara May rose, her chair legs grating across the floorboards. That's not potatoes. Silas crossed to the cellar door and eased it open. The lantern light fell just enough to show the first 2 steps, the rest swallowed in black. He took the shotgun from the rack, thumbed the safety, and went down first, Jonas behind him. The cellar was cool and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth and pickled vegetables. Shelves lined the walls, jars gleaming like amber teeth in the lamplight. In the far corner, where the shadows pooled deepest, something shifted. Come on out, Silas said. For a moment, nothing. Then a boy stepped into the light, thin as a fence rail, clothes too big, hair sticking up in stubborn tufts. He couldn't have been more than 12. His hands were empty, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room as if he'd already mapped 3 escape routes. Jonas's voice was low. Where'd you come from, son? The boy's jaw set. From the wagon. Silas's stomach turned. The freight wagon? You were under it. The boy nodded once. Till it tipped. Then I ran. Didn't want the county man to see me. Clara May's voice came from the top of the stairs, tight as wire. How long have you been here? Since the fire, the boy said. I was watching from the sage. When you all went inside, I found the cellar door. Didn't take nothing. Jonah stepped closer. What's your name? The boy hesitated. Eli. Silas studied him. The dirt on his face was streaked in places, not from tears, but from sweat and quick movement. What was in that wagon, Eli? The boy's eyes flicked to the floor, then back to Silas. Things the county don't want folks to know they have. And people they don't want in town. The words landed heavy. Silas remembered the placard, the sealed box, the coin on a string. This boy wasn't just hiding from fear of sickness. He was hiding from whatever else that wagon had been carrying. Jonas's voice was flat. How many people? Eli swallowed. 4. 2 jumped before it tipped. 1 still out there. A woman. Shoshone, I think. He glanced at Jonas. She was sick, but not like the county says. She just couldn't walk no more. The kitchen above felt like it shifted in its own frame. Silas could hear Clara May moving, the scrape of her chair against the floor. He lowered the shotgun. You're not going back out there tonight, Silas said. You'll stay here, and in the morning, you're going to tell me everything. Eli shook his head. If I stay, they'll come here. I've seen how they follow tracks. Silas stepped closer, his voice low but edged. If you leave, you're on your own. Out there, the wind's not the only thing hunting. The boy's chin lifted, defiance fighting with fear. And in here? In here, Silas said. You've got people who'll fight for you. The air between them went still. Eli looked from Silas to Jonas to Clara May, weighing the truth of it. His shoulders eased just enough to show he believed maybe half of what he'd heard. And for a boy who'd lived too long on the wrong side of trust, half was a start. They brought him upstairs. Mara Lee was standing in the hall when they came up, bundle in her arms, eyes wide. Eli froze, staring at the blanket, and for a second it was as if the rest of the room vanished. You know her? Silas asked. Eli nodded slowly. Saw her once, behind the depot. She was looking for water. Mara Lee's grip on the bundle tightened. I remember. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or the uneasy bond of survivors who've learned the same hard rules. They ate chili at the kitchen table, the smell of cumin and slow-cooked beef filling the room, but no one was thinking about the food. Jonas asked Eli questions between spoonfuls, pulling details like nails from old boards. Clara May kept Eli's bowl full without him asking. Mara Lee sat close to the boy, silent but alert. Halfway through the meal, Silas spoke. Tomorrow, we find that woman. If she's alive, we bring her here. Eli set down his spoon. And if she's not? Silas looked him in the eye. Then we give her the kind of rest the county never will. The room went quiet except for the simmering pot on the stove. Tense exchange. Clara May. You take in one more, Silas, and the county will come with chains instead of paper. Silas. Then they'd better bring enough for all of us. Jonas. They don't need chains for me. Eli. You think you can fight them? Silas. No, but I can make it cost them more than they're willing to pay. The lantern light in the kitchen had burned down to a low gold haze when Jonas pushed back from the table. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was the kind that gathers before someone says a thing that can't be taken back. We leave now, Jonas said simply. If she's out there, night will hide us better than morning. If she's gone, we'll know before the county does. Eli looked up from his bowl, chili gone cold in front of him. She was near the dry wash, a mile past the cottonwood where you found me. I saw her when we stopped for water. She couldn't stand. Clara May wiped her hands on a rag. And if the county's already combing that ground? Silas stood, the chair legs groaning against the floor. Then we ride quieter than they walk. He went to the rack by the door and pulled down his saddle gun, a Winchester .44 with the bluing worn to silver on the edges. Jonas took the bough he'd left, leaning against the porch rail, checking each sinew with the care of a man who knows what can fail him in the dark. Clara May fetched 2 canteens and a small tin of biscuits from the pantry. "You're staying here," Silas told her. Her eyes flashed. "So I can warm the coffee for the county when they show up?" "Not likely." Jonas's voice was a steady river. "We'll move faster with 3, not 4, and someone needs to be here if they come early." Clara May looked between them, jaw tight, then nodded. "Fine, but you bring her back breathing, or you bring her back proper." Outside, the night was sharp and moonless. The stars were the only lamps, cold and bright as hammered tin. Silas saddled Whisper, feeling the mare's warmth under his hands, the steady thump of her breath. Jonas's paint gelding, Crow Step, shifted once under the weight of his rider, and then stilled. Eli clambered onto the back of Silas's pack mule, no saddle, just a rope loop for a handhold. They moved out of the yard without a word. The sound of hooves on packed dirt faded into the hush of the open range. The air carried the scents of sage, dust, and the faintest trace of smoke from the kitchen stove. They took the old stage trail for the first half-mile, then cut across the flats, weaving between low sagebrush and the skeletal shadows of juniper. Jonas led, his eyes finding the darker dark where the land dipped. Twice he raised a hand and they stopped, listening. Once it was for a coyote's high wail, once for the far-off rumble of a wagon, probably the county working another road. At the edge of the dry wash, Jonas dismounted, leading Crow Step down the slope. Silas followed, Whisper's hooves sliding in the loose shale. Eli clung to the mule's mane, teeth gritted. The wash smelled of old water and dust. Jonas knelt, running his fingers over the ground. "Tracks," he murmured. 2 days old. Boots. Smaller than a man's. He looked up at Silas. She was here. They followed the faint prints downstream, where the wash widened and the moonlight finally reached the floor. That's when they saw her. She was propped against a rock shelf, knees drawn up, hair long and black as the night itself, tangled with sage twigs. Her dress was worn to threads at the hem, the pattern faded but still showing the geometric marks of Shoshone weaving. Her breathing was shallow, lips cracked, eyes half-lidded. Jonas knelt beside her, speaking in Shoshone, his words low and rhythmic. She blinked, her gaze focusing, then flicking from him to Silas. He offered her the canteen. She drank in small, deliberate sips. "She says her name is Naya," Jonas translated. "She's been here since the wreck. Can't walk far. Fever took her strength." Silas scanned the darkness around them. "We can carry her between us, but not quick." Eli shifted on the mule's back. "If we head straight north, we can cut through the cottonwood flats. Less open ground." Jonas's eyes narrowed. Less open, more places to hide trouble. Before Silas could answer, a sound rolled in from the ridge. Hooves, more than one set, the kind of rhythm you feel in the ground before you hear it in the air. "County," Eli whispered. They moved fast. Jonas lifted Naya into his arms, settling her across Crow Step's withers. Silas swung up onto Whisper and signaled Eli to keep low behind him on the mule. They stayed in the wash, letting the banks hide them, the sound of the approaching riders growing sharper. Jonas took the lead again, cutting toward the flats. The ground here was softer, muffling the hoofbeats, but it also held scent longer. Any decent tracker could follow them. Half a mile on, the wash split. Jonas angled left into a tunnel of cottonwoods where the air turned cooler. The branches above caught the starlight and broke it into pieces across their path. That's when the second twist came. A voice rang out from ahead, not behind. "Hold it right there." 4 figures stepped from the shadows, rifles level. They weren't county men, not with that mix of wide brim hats, patched dusters and belts heavy with cartridges. Outlaws working the in-between hours where law moved slow. The one in front was broad through the shoulders, with a beard gone white at the edges and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He looked over the group, eyes settling on Naya draped across Jonas's saddle. "Well," he said, voice like gravel in a tin pan. "Looks like you boys picked up something worth selling." Silas's hand eased toward his rifle stock. "She's not for sale." The man chuckled without humor. "Everything's for sale if you know the market. Sick ones fetch more than you'd think. Quarantine barns pay in cash to keep their beds full." Jonas's bow came up, the arrowhead catching a shard of starlight. "You won't touch her." The man's eyes flicked to Jonas. "A bow? That's quaint. You plan to put a stick through me before my boys drop you?" The Idia air tightened. Naya stirred weakly, whispering something in Shoshone. Jonas's jaw locked. Silas spoke into the space between the words. "You've got two choices. You walk away now, or you ride away slower after I make an example of you." The man grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Big talk from a rancher playing hero. "Not playing," Silas said. The standoff held, every second an inch closer to a trigger. Eli's breath was quick against Silas's back. Somewhere above, an owl called once, twice, then went silent. Jonas shifted his stance, just enough for Silas to see it. In the same heartbeat, the outlaw leader's gaze flicked toward the sound of the mule's hoof scraping a stone. Silas moved first. The Winchester came up and barked once, the round shattering the branch inches above the leader's head. At the same instant, Jonas's arrow hissed through the dark and buried itself in the ground between the boots of the man to the leader's right. "Next ones don't miss," Silas said. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the leader raised a hand, signaling his men to lower their rifles. "You're lucky I'm feeling generous tonight," he said, but his eyes promised the debt wasn't settled. They melted back into the trees, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the north. They didn't speak until they'd cleared the flats and climbed back into the open hills. Naya rested easier now, her head against Jonas's chest. Eli kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting the shadows to grow teeth. By the time the ranch lights came into view, the eastern sky was paling. Clara May was on the porch, a lantern in one hand, the other shading her eyes. They brought Naya inside, settling her on the daybed near the kitchen stove. Jonas spoke to her in Shoshone until her eyes closed in sleep. Silas set the Winchester on the rack and met Clara May's gaze. "Well?" she asked. "She's here," Silas said, "but so's trouble, twice over." Clara May's mouth tightened. "Then we'd better make enough chili to feed an army or a fight." Silas managed the ghost of a smile. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Morning didn't so much arrive as seep in. The sky paled over the eastern ridge, soft as breath on glass. The frost on the grass outside the bunkhouse caught the light and threw it back in silver. From the porch, you could smell the coffee before you could see the steam. Clara May had been up before anyone, rattling the stove to life, the aroma wrapping itself around the ranch like a welcome you didn't have to earn. Silas came out of the barn, rubbing the chill from his hands. He'd checked the animals, their breath pluming in the still air, the soft shifting of hooves grounding him in the familiar rhythm of care. His eyes swept the yard automatically. No dust on the horizon, no riders cresting the hills, just the wide, stubborn quiet of Blackhorn Valley holding its ground. Inside, the house was awake in a quieter way. Jonas sat near the daybed, speaking in Shoshone to Naya. She was sitting up now, color in her cheeks, the fever eased but not gone. The bundle at her side was not cloth or coin, but a small pouch of herbs she'd kept even through the wreck. Medicine of her people, the kind that county doctors would dismiss, but that Jonas treated like gold. Mara Lee was at the kitchen table with Eli, both bent over a plate of cornbread, Clara May had cut thick and buttered heavy. They didn't talk much, but there was a strange ease in their silence. Two people who didn't need to fill the air to prove they belonged at the same table. Silas poured himself a cup and leaned on the counter, letting the warmth settle into his hands. For the first time since the Cottonwood Road, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the last 2 days. The wreck, the placard, the county's stare, the outlaws' rifles, the choice that kept pressing its thumb against the back of his neck. The world outside the ranch fence hadn't changed. The county would still come asking, in their way. The outlaws in the flats would remember the warning shot. And somewhere in that dry stretch of country, there were still people like Naya, between sickness and survival, between being seen and being erased. But here, in this kitchen, something had shifted. It wasn't just the number of chairs filled. It was the way Jonas's voice softened when Naya answered. The way Eli no longer sat with his shoulders curled forward. The way Mara Lee's hand rested just for a second on the table instead of on the bundle that had been her anchor. Even Clara May, who had built her life on keeping her back to the wall, moved through the room without glancing at the door every few minutes. It was fragile, yes, but it was real. By midday, the sun had burned off the frost, leaving the yard smelling of thawed earth and wood smoke. Jonas had gone to split kindling. Clara May was kneading dough, her forearms dusted white, humming under her breath. Eli was helping Silas mend a section of fence near the south pasture, his small hands learning the rhythm of wire and staple. Mara Lee had taken Naya outside, sitting with her in the sun near the rose bushes Catherine had planted years ago. The bushes were wild now, thorns thick, branches reaching every which way, but the roots had held through drought and snow. When the wind moved through them, it sounded like low, steady breathing. Silas watched them from the porch. Naya's head was tipped back, eyes closed, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Mara Lee said something, and for the first time, Naya smiled. It was small, but it was enough. That night, they ate together, chili con carne, cornbread, and coffee strong enough to keep a man warm through the last watch before dawn. The fire in the hearth cracked and sighed. No one spoke about the county, the outlaws, or the fact that tomorrow might bring one or both back to their gate. They didn't need to. The unspoken was part of the air now, like the scent of sage after rain. Jonas told a story in Shoshone, his voice rising and falling like the wind between hills. Clara May listened, even when she didn't understand the words, her eyes soft in a way Silas hadn't seen before. Eli leaned forward, caught in the rhythm. Mara Lee sat close to Naya, translating pieces here and there, her voice careful, like she didn't want to disturb the story's shape. Silas let the sound wash over him. This was what the county couldn't measure, couldn't file, couldn't lock up in a barn. It was what made the risk worth taking. Later, when the fire had burned low and the others had drifted to bed, Silas stepped outside. The sky was clear, the stars sharp. The wind was moving just enough to keep the night from feeling too still. He thought of Catherine, of how she used to stand in this very spot and say the wind here stayed in a way it didn't in other places. She'd meant it as a kindness, that whatever good you built here, the wind would carry it just far enough to last, but never so far it forgot where it came from. He wondered if that was true for people too. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe the county would come with paper, maybe the outlaws with rifles, maybe both. But he knew this. When they came, they'd find more than a ranch. They'd find a place where people were held the way Mara Lee had held that bundle. Not because it was easy, but because letting go wasn't an option. They'd find a man who'd made his choice and wouldn't be talked out of it. They'd find Jonas, whose arrows spoke for him. Clara May, whose hands could comfort or fight without changing their grip. Two children who'd learned, in the space of a few days, that sometimes survival meant sitting at a table and letting someone else serve you first. And they'd find Naya, who'd been carried out of the dark and into the sun, and who might one day walk back into the wind on her own terms. Silas turned back to the house. The lamp in the kitchen window threw a square of gold onto the yard. He could hear faint laughter from inside. Eli at something Jonas had said, Clara May telling him not to talk with his mouth full. It was a sound he'd missed without knowing how much. He stepped inside, closing the door against the night. The West had its share of rules, but out here, some rules were older than paper. Feed the hungry, shelter the cold, stand with the living, even when the dead are easier to carry. Silas didn't know if that would be enough to keep the trouble away, but he knew it was enough to look himself in the eye come morning. Sometimes keeping a promise isn't about who you made it to. It's about who you become when you keep it. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the wind stays just long enough to remind you why you made it in the first place.